Today I'm joined by Chris Maslin. Chris is the founder of Maslins Limited, a chartered tax advisor, and he's also the founder of GoEO, who help businesses convert to an employee ownership trust. So welcome, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Simon. Yeah, that's spot on.
Yeah, well, look, Chris, I always like to dig a bit deeper into what you actually do. So tell us a little bit more about Maslins and also GoEO.
So I started Maslins 16 years ago now. Initially as a very stereotypical local accountant, and that was the goal. But probably just due to the time of when it was happening, I think cloud computing was starting to take off. So the sort of making of that business was when we stumbled across bookkeeping package Free Agent, which you may or may not be familiar with, but it's along the same lines as Xero and Sage and that lot. And yeah, that helped us grow. So we were predominantly working with one-person companies, so freelancers, contractors, that kind of thing, helping them with, yeah, your very stereotypical compliance stuff, VAT returns, corporation tax, accounts, etc., etc. So I was running that, as my business for 12 years. And towards the end of that, I think, it was going great guns. I mean, not astronomical growth, but we were at, let's say, about £1 million turnover, about a dozen employees, around about that level. And some of the senior staff, it became apparent they were sort of more enthusiastic about pushing the business than I was, which I don't think is a good place to be in. You want your leader to be inspirational. And so that's, yeah, in 2021, we transitioned control of that company to an employee ownership trust. So I realize its awareness of that isn't massive, but it's a little bit like a management buyout, except that with a management buyout, it's your senior team putting their hands in their own pocket, going to their own bank, putting money in themselves. With an EOT, it's a newly created trust that buys the shares. So from the staff's perspective, there's not really any risk for them. They're not paying in any of their own money. From the founder's perspective, if there is a bad side, it's that you tend to get paid out over a longer period because there is no external cash coming in. So yeah, did that in 2021. Loved it effectively. So now helping other people do the same via GoEO.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you for that background and that journey as well as how you got into that. So actually, let's go back a step further. So so when you set up Maslins, what was the reason for setting up Maslins at the time?
So I did about 5 years in, let's call it corporate accounting world, working, training, earning my stripes and all that kind of stuff. With hindsight, I realized I was probably a slightly awkward employee. I was the kind of person always asking, why are we doing it this way? And getting a bit frustrated when I was told, because that's the way we did it last year, that's the way we always do it.
Okay.
So I think I was probably always destined to run my own business, basically just by virtue of being a bit awkward
Yeah.
and challenging things. So yeah, basically, as soon as I was able to, there's sort of minimum qualifying periods before you're allowed to operate on your own. I did that, and I probably found it as hard as almost everybody does because, like a lot of people, I had a skill that I like to think I was reasonably good at, but I had no sales background, I had no marketing background. So, when you're employed in another firm, obviously the work is just put on your lap and you have to do it. All of a sudden, when you're out there on your own, you have to go and win the work, which is just a totally new concept. So it was quite a hard graft getting it off the ground.
And and actually, what you've hit on there is one of the challenges that a lot of people have going into new business, isn't it? That they're really good at what they do, accountants, plumbers, electricians, solicitors, whatever. But it's those other things that go with it: sales, marketing, finance, all those sort of things that maybe they're not so familiar with. And it's getting to that level where then you can start to surround yourself by a team that can actually do those things for you. But initially, you've got to do it all yourself. Um, so
Yeah, which is it's really exciting. It's arguably really fun, because every day's totally different. One day you're mucking around with your website trying to pretend to be a graphic designer. The next day you're at a networking meeting. The day after that you're doing, some real work, trying to knuckle down. So yeah, it keeps the variety high.
okay, and um, so let's think back then. So you started off as a solopreneur, just you. who was what was the first role you recruited for in the business?
So the first recruit was technically my mother.
Okay.
Bless her. I mean, I think her role was probably more counselor than anything else.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I guess arguably a very low budget business coach
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of really just someone to offload on, have a bit of a moan, maybe offer a little bit of, well, a lot of emotional support, a limited amount of business support, not a lot. But she also had a background in accountancy, so that helped that she could help me out with some of the little bits of work because I think in the very, very early days when I had no work, it was quite easy. There was no sort of conflicting things on what I should do with my time. If anything, the hardest time was maybe, let's say, 1 year in,
Mm,
where I didn't have enough work to live off, but I had some work that needed doing,
mm.
and trying to switch mindset between, or, what should I be doing now? Should I do those 3 sets of accounts that are waiting for me but are not particularly urgent, or should I be out there trying to win more stuff? So yeah, very first recruit was my mother, and the next one was a trainee, which it worked perfectly because um, basically needed someone to do some donkey work, for want of a better phrase. And they were only looking for 2 days a week work. So it was sort of friend of a friend type situation. Because I think, taking on a full-time trainee is an awful lot to take on, if there's just one of you really to look after them in terms of finding them stuff to do, training them, etc., etc. So I did find that the 2 days that they were working, I didn't really get much of my own stuff done, but it was nice having 3 days when they weren't there. So that worked really well. And over time, they gradually went up, eventually became full time. And, things kind of blossomed from there.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things to highlight there, which is, I think, firstly, the having that, as you say, you called it the emotional support, the people around you to just to talk to, and support you and guide you, which in your case was was your mum. The second thing that you highlighted there was that juggling, because you're right, when you start out, if you haven't got any work, well, you can focus completely on sales and marketing, going out and getting the business, but that sort of starts to change, doesn't it? So how did you deal with that challenge of going, okay, I've got these accounts to do, but I've also got to go out and get some more work? How did you personally sort of manage that dilemma?
Well, I found it very hard, and I probably did the worst thing of just doing a good job of neither. So
It's very honest.
it's that typical thing when there's a pile of ironing to do and you've got an exam to revise for. We all had this when we were in our student days, and you end up just doing neither because you're stressing about which one you should do. I mean, I think beyond that, I suppose it was a case of thinking about which bits do I enjoy, which bits do I want to be doing more of,
Yeah, yeah.
and then when looking at who to recruit or what sort of role to recruit for, doing it on that basis. And I think certainly in accountancy world, I notice there's a real divide. And I'm not saying either one's right or wrong, but you either get the person that loves doing the accountancy work, right? And they will set out on their own. Over a while, they'll build up a nice portfolio of clients, and then they'll stick at that because they don't really want to delegate any of the accountancy work. They might get support on the sales and marketing side, but once they've got enough work for them, they don't really want that anymore because there's a limit to how much they can do. And then you get the other ones, which is more like me, where I have no great love of accountancy. I don't feel particularly bad saying that, but it was a case of it was the skill I had. It was the thing that people were prepared to pay a bit of money for, so it was the obvious choice. So I guess as soon as I was able to drift more into I'm running a business rather than I am an accountant, I sort of grabbed that and it worked. I was much happier then.
I like the way you've sort of thought about that in terms of, okay, what do you enjoy and what are you good at? And therefore deciding who do I need to surround myself with. So um, and that to me is about sort of thinking forward, and this is something I work with on my clients, is creating that future organogram of the business. Right, what is my business going to look like in the future from a personnel perspective? Okay, so how many people am I going to have in sales and marketing, operations, finance, etc.? And then looking at that and saying, okay, which one of those roles am I going to start to fill first? Then go for the next one, the next one, the next one. So yeah, it sounds like you sort of went through that sort of similar process of going, well, okay, which are the roles that you're going to focus on, and which do you need people to help and support you with. The other thing that I picked up from what you sort of said earlier, Chris, was the investing time in training the people that you recruit, because that's the key thing, isn't it? Because firstly, when you recruit people, it can be time consuming, because they may have to learn things, they may have to learn the systems, the processes, they need to be onboarded. So actually you're hiring somebody initially to help you to balance the work, but that initial phase can actually be more intensive until you get through that and they're onboarded, bedded in, and then you reap the long-term rewards. So that was sort of something that you highlighted as well, which I thought was really really interesting.
Very much so. I mean, I think, yeah, to sort of go a little bit further back in my story, when I left uni, my first year out of uni was very, very hard. I think that in my third year of uni, I was a combination of naive and arrogant and thought, I'm going to be a graduate. Everyone will want to offer me amazing jobs. So I applied for the best jobs going, didn't even get first stage interviews. So my ego took an enormous hit, which was probably a good thing. But yeah, I had a very hard time getting that sort of first foot on the career ladder. So I think as part of that, I have an awful lot of sympathy for people who, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, that there's so many people out there that are very, very capable, but have not, for whatever reason, managed to get that first little chance. So I think we've always been very keen to take on as many new trainees as we can. Not all of them work out, but it's as many people as possible that we can give that chance to. And I think where that reaps rewards for us longer term, the lady who's currently managing director of that business started with us as a trainee 11 years ago. Wow. So I think that's a lovely story. Some people have trained up with us and left and gone elsewhere, and that's totally fine. We totally respect that. But I do think there's maybe a greater sense of loyalty because perhaps when they joined us, they weren't in a strong position. Whereas now maybe they are in a strong position, but they feel, yes, I don't want to overplay the loyalty and make it sound like, they're not allowed to leave. It's not a cult. But I think, they just feel looked after.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes a long way. And, there's been a lot of research on why do employees stay with employers, or indeed, why do they choose to go to employers? And it's, of course, money plays a part. But as long as it's a fair salary, the other things that people take into account are things like loyalty, job opportunities to do interesting work, opportunities to be trained, all of those sort of things that actually makes people want to stay at businesses.
Well, I think, we've certainly got that. So, well, it was something I was very aware of. When we took on our first trainees, I assumed that they would all do pretty much what I did, which is get that trainee role, get qualified, say, thank you very much. I'm now off to, go out in the big wide world, whatever way it may be. So that's really what I expected. And when they have stayed around, it's been something I focused on, sort of, right, okay, they've ticked that box, they're now a qualified accountant. What's the next step? Because I do feel like the majority of people need to be working towards something. They need that goal. And, you can continue setting more goals just further above. So, it's something we've been quite focused on, trying to make sure that there's things they can develop into. And I think that the employee ownership helps with that, because it's drifted it away from, it's my business, it's always going to be my business, you can only ever be an employee, to suddenly we'll take Chris out of the picture, and all of a sudden there's sort of a lot of upward scope there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that is, people sort of seeing that there's opportunities to grow, opportunities to be promoted, to do the things that they want to do. So I absolutely agree with what you said there, Chris. And the other thing that sort of rang true with me about this sort of balance of work, in terms of working in the business and working on the business, as they say, in that, something I get very focused on with my clients is helping them to segment their time, to literally sort of say during the week, right, okay, how much time am I going to invest in doing the work? In your case, the accounts back then, right, okay. How much time am I going to allocate on doing sales and marketing, and when? How much time am I going to allocate to doing the finances, and when? So actually rather than just going, oh, I'm going to do a bit of this, I'm going to do a bit of that, and this is pressing and that's pressing, to actually structure their time and say, right, where do I need to invest my time? And that will change it will change as business grows, it will change as people employ, people employed. But yeah, look and say, right, how do I need to invest my time?
Yeah, I mean, I should have done a better job of that in the early days, because what I tend to do is go, should I do this, this, or this? You know what? I'll go and make myself a cup of tea whilst I think about it. And, before you know it, a few hours have gone and you've done nothing.
You're not alone there. You're not alone there, Chris. That's we all find ourselves doing that at times. So
Well, that's where, things like social media can come in as well, because you can kind of convince yourself you're working because, you're talking with other business owners and stuff like that. But yes, it's very easy to waste a lot of time and achieve very little.
yeah, and before you know it, you're watching dogs on skateboards or something. So and Chris, like, we've talked a few things about some of the challenges you experienced on in the early sort of days. But what would you say the biggest challenge that you've faced being a business owner is?
Well, so I'm kind of on my third business now, and the bit that frustrates me is how every time I forget how hard it is at the beginning. Um, because there's an element that you've got something that you offer and you think there's a market for it, but you're not too sure. It's a little bit untested at this stage. But obviously, awareness is very low. Certainly about, you as a specific individual. Maybe if you offer accountancy, obviously awareness of accountancy is huge. So I think the hardest bit, yeah, has always been that getting that initial bit of traction. I suppose because my background is not in sales. I'm not a natural salesperson. I like to think I'm a good supporter for people. So generally speaking, when we get a customer, they're happy with it. But I may be in a situation where I'm competing with people that are much more gifted orators and promise the earth, and so I just don't get the deal in the first place. So I think the hardest thing for me is building that track record. And each time you stop a business and start a new one, there's an element that you as an individual might have a bit of a track record behind you, but it's a brand new business with no customers that leaving testimonials and things like that. So I think, yeah, the sales in the early days has always been the hardest bit for me.
Yeah, and is there any particular ways that you've overcome that you've learned? Because as you say, you're on your third business now. Is there any things that you do that help you to overcome that? Because that's a challenge that I'm sure a lot of people watching and listening to this will experience.
So I can't give any technical answer to that, but I suppose ignoring the technical side, I would say that having persistence and having emotional support,
Yeah.
because you will have times where days, if not months, go by and there's not a lot coming in. And I think, if you've got a mortgage to pay and all these kinds of things, it can be quite hard. So I guess you've got to have belief in yourself and belief in what you're offering. And then when you do get some customers, uh, sounds a bit dark, but exploit them, not in terms of trying to get as much money from them as possible, but in terms of uh, gently coerce them to to leave you a nice review, to tell their friends, but also I suppose in terms of asking for feedback from them. Look, what were the bits that were really helpful for you? Were there any bits that actually, overall you were happy with the service, but bits where you thought we could have done it better? Because I think, yeah, that once you've got a few of those, it then helps you tailor what you offer, because I think it can be a bit dangerous to, just assume what people want. And if you never change away from that, you may well do okay, but I think it's always that much better if you can evolve your offering around what people actually want once you've really helped a few through it.
Great tips there. I mean, you sort of said, yeah, look, steering away from the technical, but there's some really interesting things that you've shared there. The first thing is, yeah, look, a lot of us don't, we're not proactive enough in asking for reviews or asking for referrals. That's a marketing and sales strategy in its own right. Just asking, look, who do you know that could also benefit from my services, my products, etc. Would you mind leaving me a review and helping them to do it, sending them the link? All of these are great marketing strategies. And the other thing that you mentioned there is ask and listen. Ask about what it is that they like about your products, services, what you do. Ask about what they need, because that helps you to shape future marketing and sales as well. So really great sort of points there to share. Thank you for that. And what would you say the biggest learning is that since you've been in business?
I'm trying to say something other than what I've said in response to the last few questions. Biggest learning since I've been in business. Well, I guess I am sort of self-diagnosed only as ADHD.
Okay.
But I do think that when you're a business owner, especially, maybe that makes it harder when it's just you because you're not very good at focusing on things. But when you've got a bit of a team around you, um, I know it's maybe a bit cringeworthy that it can be seen as a superpower, but it amazes me how many things I can get done. Not always get them done brilliantly, and that's where you have a kind of team underneath you. So, I'll sort of come up with the idea, get the most vaguest of prototypes in place super quickly, and then palm it off to someone that's a bit more of a details person that can, sand off the rough edges and all that kind of thing. So I suppose there's a bit of finding out about myself there. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, the world's constantly evolving. I think back to what technology was like when I started, which isn't that long ago, 16 years ago. The internet was very much a thing. But having said that, still a lot of my work was going out to visit a client, sitting at their computer, doing things, whereas nowadays that just seems ridiculous. Why on earth would you do that? So yeah, I feel like, cloud computing has been a huge thing over the last 10, 15 years. AI is obviously the new buzz phrase that everybody's talking about and sort of umming and ahhing about how significantly that's going to change us. But yeah, very much just trying to not quite be the forefront of those things. That would be over-egging my skills, but just making sure that you don't ignore things like this, that you see what's going on, you have a play around with them, you try and figure out how you can use it. So I'm having a great time with ChatGPT at the moment. Just I'm sure it has helped me, but part of it is really just playing around with it and just seeing what happens. And I think as part of that, you're learning, even if you don't necessarily think you're learning. I suppose it's like being a kid where, you give them a ball and they don't know that they're playing, they don't know that they're learning, but they're doing both of those things as they move it around on the floor. Basically, I'm like that with ChatGPT now.
I like the description. And by the way, I do exactly the same. I find it a really interesting tool to ask questions with and learn things from. And again, if I may just highlight some things that you've said there, going back, the first thing you said was actually understanding yourself. What your strengths and what your areas for development are, and saying, well, what am I good at? And then getting people around you again that can pick up on those other things. And whether it's ADHD or whatever, we've all got strength things that we're good at, whether it's due to our personalities. Some people love the detail, and some people love sort of sales and marketing and that sort of thing. There's a great book called The E-Myth written by Michael Gerber, and he says that any business should have 3 types of people: an entrepreneur who goes out with, has got all the ideas and comes up with these interesting things to do. The problem with the entrepreneur is that they leave a wave of destruction behind them because they're constantly moving on to the next thing. So therefore, what you need is a manager. You need a manager to grab hold of those ideas and put structure around them, and put goals and plans in place. And then what you need is the technicians, the ones that implement those structures and plans. And to what you described there, to me, it sounds as though, you're that entrepreneur that's got the ideas and comes up, with these things where we're going to move forward. And you've surrounded yourself by the people that can help you manage those and implement those, which is great. And then the other thing you mentioned there was keeping up with technology. I think that's a great learning, right? Yeah, I don't believe that anybody's behind on AI at the moment. Where it's moving ahead, it's going there. The key thing is if the people don't grab hold of it now, they will get behind of how they can use AI in their business. So it's about playing with it and learning it. So look, great advice there and great learnings. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And there's one question that I always like to ask everybody that's kind enough to join me on this, Chris, and that's, what is the best advice that you would give to an 18-year-old you? if you could go back and speak to yourself when you were 18, what would you say to yourself?
Um, Give up alcohol. It's not doing you any favors. I'm guessing that's not the answer you were looking for.
It's a
Um,
good answer, though. I like it.
well, I think there's a strong argument that, 5+ years of my life were basically wasted just by. I had a great time and I made some good friends, but I didn't achieve anything. I just so ignoring that. Maybe just to try stuff in my own free time a bit more. Like I say, not necessarily thinking it from this has to be productive, but a bit like we were saying with ChatGPT, play around with things, because that only sort of came to me a bit later in life. I was of the attitude that you have work, you have your job where you go and you do work, or it could be, university or whatever where you're studying, and then you go home and you watch TV and you enjoy yourself effectively, but just trying to spend a bit more of my free time because I had a huge amount of it in my late teens and early 20s, and I didn't do anything with it. And it's not about necessarily, working 24/7. That's not what I'm trying to say, but I wasn't inquisitive, I suppose. And I wish I was a bit more, what's this thing people are talking about? Oh, I might try playing around with that. That's something that I've only really started doing probably in the last 5 to 10 years.
I like that. I think that's, I like those words that you said in the middle there. Being more inquisitive. I think that's a great thing to share. Yeah, just being more inquisitive, try things. Yeah, brilliant. Look, thank you, Chris. I really look, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today and sharing more about your businesses, but also your journey as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Appreciate you having me.